The moonlight danced across the dark waters as Emma's whispered words hung in the air between them. "I've never told anyone this before, but I'm terrified of dying alone." Her confession, so vulnerable and unexpected, made Jake's heart stop. How had they ended up here, stranded on a yacht in the middle of nowhere, the woman he'd spent years trying to impress now turning to him with tears in her eyes? 24 hours ago, she had been just his intimidating boss. Now, as the night wrapped around them like a blanket, everything was changing. If you're enjoying this story of unexpected connection and second chances, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more emotional journeys that remind us how life's greatest storms often lead to the most beautiful beginnings. Jake Matthews checked his watch for the 5th time in 10 minutes, trying to ignore the knot in his stomach. The company retreat was supposed to be a networking opportunity, a chance to finally get noticed by the higher-ups at Meridian Publishing. Instead, he was running late, his 7-year-old daughter Lily's fever having broken only an hour ago. "Daddy, you can go now." "I'm feeling better," Lily said, her small voice still raspy as she clutched her favorite stuffed rabbit. Jake smoothed her dark curls away from her forehead. "You sure, Pumpkin? Mrs. Rodriguez is right next door if you need anything, and I've got my phone." "I know, Daddy. You've told me 100 times." She rolled her eyes with all the dramatic flair a second grader could muster. "Besides, I'm going to sleep forever. I'm super tired." He kissed her forehead, relieved it felt cool against his lips. "Not forever, just until morning. I'll be back before you know it." The truth was, Jake couldn't afford to miss this retreat. 3 years at Meridian, working his way up from assistant editor to senior editor, and he was finally in line for the promotion to editorial director. A position that would mean better hours, better pay, and most importantly, better stability for Lily. Since Sarah had died 4 years ago, he'd been juggling single parenthood and career ambitions with varying degrees of success. The marina was quiet when he arrived, most of the attendees already aboard the company's chartered yacht. Jake hurried down the dock, overnight bag slung over his shoulder, rehearsing his apology to Emma Winters, Meridian's notoriously demanding CEO. Emma had a reputation for being brilliant but cold, the ice queen of publishing, they called her behind her back. At 38, she'd transformed a struggling publishing house into one of the industry's most respected names. Jake had only interacted with her directly a handful of times, each occasion leaving him feeling like he'd been thoroughly assessed and found wanting. "Matthews." Cutting it close. Her voice, crisp and authoritative, stopped him in his tracks as he stepped onto the yacht. Emma stood at the railing, champagne flute in hand, the evening breeze playing with her auburn hair. Unlike the rest of the attendees in casual cruise wear, she wore tailored black pants and a silk blouse, as if this were just another board meeting. "Ms. Winters, I apologize for the delay. My daughter was sick, and I—" "Your daughter? Lily, correct?" Emma interrupted, surprising him by knowing his child's name. "Nothing serious, I hope. Just a fever. She's better now." Emma nodded once. "Good. The presentations begin in 30 minutes. Your cabin is below deck, 3rd door on the right." She turned away, conversation clearly over. Jake exhaled slowly. That had gone better than expected. He found his cabin, small but comfortable, and quickly changed into something more appropriate for an evening of corporate mingling. By the time he emerged, the yacht was already moving away from the harbor, the city lights growing distant. The next few hours passed in a blur of presentations, networking, and strategic conversations about Meridian's future. Jake delivered his pitch for a new digital imprint targeting young adult readers, aware of Emma's intense gaze from the back of the room. He couldn't read her expression, but at least she hadn't walked out. It was nearly midnight when the party began to wind down. Most of the executives had retired to their cabins, leaving only a few diehards at the bar. Jake stood at the stern, nursing a whiskey and watching the moonlight on the water. The yacht was anchored for the night in a sheltered cove, the gentle rocking almost hypnotic. Your presentation was impressive. Jake turned to find Emma beside him, her own glass now filled with what looked like water. Thank you, Ms. Winters. Emma, please. We're not in the office. She leaned against the railing. You've been with us 3 years now. 3 years, 4 months. And before that, you were at HarperCollins? Jake nodded, surprised she knew his background. Until Sarah, my wife, got sick. I needed something closer to home, more flexible hours. Cancer, wasn't it? Her voice had softened slightly. Yes. Pancreatic. It was, quick. Even now, the words felt inadequate to describe those terrible months. Emma was quiet for a moment. I lost my sister to the same thing 5 years ago. The personal revelation caught Jake off guard. In 3 years, he'd never heard Emma mention family. Before he could respond, a sudden jolt rocked the yacht. They both grabbed the railing as the lights flickered, then went out completely. Emergency lights came on seconds later, casting everything in an eerie blue glow. What the hell was that? Emma's CEO voice was back. The yacht's captain appeared, his face grim. Ms. Winters, we've hit something, possibly a submerged container. The hull's damaged, and we're taking on water. How serious? Serious enough. I've sent out a distress signal, but we're at least 4 hours from the nearest Coast Guard station. I need everyone to put on life jackets immediately. The next 30 minutes were chaos. The yacht was indeed sinking, though slowly enough that there was time to evacuate everyone into the lifeboats. Jake helped coordinate, making sure all 23 attendees were accounted for. Matthews. Emma called over the noise. The captain says one of the lifeboats is damaged. We're 1 seat short. Jake's stomach dropped. What's the plan? The Coast Guard is sending helicopters, but they won't be here for hours. Most of the lifeboats are heading for a small island about 2 miles east. It's uninhabited but safe. And the remaining person? Emma's expression was unreadable in the emergency lighting. The yacht will stay afloat for several more hours. Someone needs to stay and keep the emergency beacon active until help arrives. I'll stay, Jake said immediately. No, I will. I'm the CEO. This is my responsibility. With all due respect, Emma, I was an Eagle Scout and I'm a strong swimmer. If something goes wrong, I have better odds. Their argument was interrupted by the captain. We need to launch the lifeboats now. The yacht's listing badly. Emma made a split-second decision. We'll both stay. The rest of you, go. The captain looked like he wanted to argue but nodded curtly. Keep the emergency radio on channel 16. Help will come. As the lifeboats pulled away, Jake turned to Emma in disbelief. Why did you do that? You didn't need to stay. Neither did you, she countered. You have a daughter waiting for you. Which is exactly why I couldn't let anyone else take the risk. Lily's already lost one parent. Emma's expression softened. That's admirable. But now we're both stuck here, so let's focus on staying alive, shall we? They moved to the highest deck as the yacht continued to sink, the lower levels already submerged. The emergency beacon blinked steadily, their lifeline to rescue. Jake had called Mrs. Rodriguez to check on Lily, relieved to hear she was still sleeping peacefully, unaware of her father's predicament. Hours passed. The yacht sank lower, the deck now just a few feet above the water line. They sat side by side, life jackets on, the emergency radio crackling occasionally with updates from the Coast Guard. Rescue was coming, but slowly. Tell me about Lily, Emma said suddenly, breaking the tense silence. Jake smiled despite their situation. She's amazing. Smart, stubborn, too perceptive for her own good. She wants to be a veterinarian and an astronaut, simultaneously, somehow. She sounds like you. God, I hope not. She deserves better than a workaholic with imposter syndrome. Emma laughed, the sound startling in its genuineness. Is that how you see yourself? On my better days. On the bad ones, I'm just a guy failing at everything. You're not failing, Jake. Your digital imprint proposal was brilliant. That's why I was watching you so closely today. I've had my eye on you for the editorial director position. Jake stared at her. You have? Why do you think I know so much about you? I do my homework on potential executives. The yacht groaned beneath them, shifting ominously. We should move to the life raft, Jake said, eyeing the small inflatable craft they'd prepared as a last resort. This thing could go under completely any minute. They carefully transferred the emergency beacon and radio to the life raft and climbed in just as the yacht's deck slipped beneath the waves. The night was clear but cold, the stars brilliant above them. They drifted, tethered to the partially submerged yacht by a rope, waiting. I hate the ocean, Emma said after a while, her voice smaller than Jake had ever heard it. Bad experience? You could say that. My father drowned when I was 12. Sailing accident. Jake looked at her with new understanding. And yet you organized a yacht retreat? Exposure therapy, she said with a wry smile. My therapist's idea. Face your fears and all that. How's that working out for you? About as well as you'd expect. She gestured at their sinking vessel. They laughed, the absurdity of their situation momentarily overriding the danger. As midnight passed and the temperature dropped further, they huddled together for warmth. Jake was surprised by how natural it felt, this new intimacy with a woman he'd previously found intimidating. Can I ask you something personal? Emma said, her breath warm against his neck. I think being stranded at sea together earns you that right. Why haven't you dated since Sarah died? Office gossip says you've turned down every setup attempt. Jake was silent for a long moment. Partly for Lily. I didn't want to confuse her with a parade of women who might not stick around. But mostly. I don't know. It never felt right. You're afraid, Emma said, not unkindly. Aren't you? I've never seen you with anyone in 3 years. It was Emma's turn to be quiet. When she finally spoke, her voice had that vulnerable quality he'd never heard before tonight. I've never told anyone this before, but I'm terrified of dying alone. The confession hung between them. I've spent my entire adult life building Meridian, and somewhere along the way, I forgot to build anything else. Jake looked at her, really looked at her, for perhaps the first time. Without her power suits and boardroom confidence, Emma Winters was just a woman with fears and regrets, like anyone else. We're not going to die here, he said firmly. That's not what I meant. She met his gaze. Even if we survive this, I'll go back to my empty penthouse and my 60-hour workweeks. And for what? So the board can replace me with someone younger the minute our numbers slip? You could change that. It's not too late. Says the man who hasn't dated in 4 years. Touché. Jake smiled. Maybe we both need to be braver. The radio crackled to life, startling them both. The Coast Guard, announcing they were 30 minutes out. Relief flooded through Jake, followed immediately by an unexpected pang of regret. Once rescued, would this newfound connection with Emma disappear? As if reading his thoughts, Emma said, when we get back, I'd like to meet Lily properly. If that's okay with you. She'd like that. She's been curious about Daddy's boss lady for ages. Daddy's boss lady? Emma raised an eyebrow. Her words, not mine, Jake laughed. The rescue helicopter appeared on the horizon, its searchlight cutting through the darkness. As they prepared to be lifted to safety, Emma reached for Jake's hand. Thank you, she said simply. For what? For seeing me. Not the Ice Queen, just me. The Coast Guard rescue was efficient and quick. By dawn, they were back on solid ground, wrapped in blankets and drinking hot coffee. The other retreat attendees, safely evacuated to the small island, would be picked up next. Jake called Mrs. Rodriguez again, relieved to hear Lily was still asleep, her fever completely gone. Emma sat beside him in the Coast Guard station, looking surprisingly composed despite their ordeal. "I've been thinking," she said, "about being braver. And I'd like to start with dinner. You and Lily. My treat." Jake smiled. "I think we'd both like that." 3 months later, Jake stood in his kitchen, watching as Emma helped Lily with her science project. The promotion to editorial director had come through, but that wasn't the biggest change in his life. The woman he'd once found intimidating was now a regular presence in their home, her laughter filling spaces that had been silent for too long. "Daddy, Emma says we can get ice cream if we finish this today," Lily announced, her face alight with excitement. "Does she now?" Jake caught Emma's eye over Lily's head, sharing a private smile. Later that night, after Lily was asleep and they sat together on his small balcony, Emma leaned her head against his shoulder. "I never expected this," she said quietly. "What? Dating an employee? I'm pretty sure HR is still in shock." She laughed. "No. Finding someone who makes me feel safe enough to be myself." Jake kissed her gently. "Sometimes the best things happen when we're thrown completely off course." As they sat together under the stars, Jake thought about that night on the sinking yacht, about Emma's midnight confession and his own fears. They were both still learning, still healing, but no longer alone in the process. Sometimes life storms don't just change our course, they bring us exactly where we need to be. If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe for more tales of unexpected love and second chances. Remember that sometimes, our greatest challenges lead us to our greatest blessings, and it's never too late to open your heart to new possibilities.